Oh, no, you're fine. All right. I think this is a good time. As soon as we get moving anyway, if we have some more people jump on, that will be fine. Our broad agenda is I'll talk about the updated numbers. The first half, the last half will help answer media questions or any of you that have questions about the forecast, access, usability, things like that. We can go through all that. So I'll have plenty of time to engage. If you have any problems during this, you can put it in the chat box. Andrea is monitoring that so she can engage with all of you on this. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and start. I first want to say a big thank you to April. April's on here, April Martin. She is from the Patterson Family Foundation. The center no longer receives state funding to do these things. And so it's great to have partners in the state who want to have access to data and information and get this out to all these communities as well. So a big thank you to the Patterson Family Foundation for funding it, not only this year, but we're going to have, unlike the previous years where we had to go and do updates, we will have annualized updates so we can get more information, make other tweaks, and keep improving this so we have data and tools for everyone in the state. So again, a big thank you for April and the Patterson Institute. She actually reached out to us to get this engaged. So with that, I actually want to turn it over to you, April, and I'll let you give a few comments.
Sure. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the CEDBR population webcast. I'm excited to be here. I just wanted to give a brief, Jeremy and Jonathan invited me to give a little overview of the Patterson Family Foundation and why we might have wanted to get involved in funding this work. So with that, I'll just give a couple slides here on the Patterson Family Foundation. The Patterson Family Foundation is a private family-led grant-making foundation. We're dedicated to extending the legacy of Neil and Jeannie Patterson. So some of you may have known Neil Patterson's name as co-founder, chairman, and CEO of Cerner Corporation in Kansas City. And he remained in that role up until his death in 2017. So unfortunately passed away early at age 67 from cancer. And his wife, Jeannie, passed away the same year after a 10-year battle with breast cancer, and she was just 59. So Neil probably important for background to mention that Neil did grow up on a farm in South Central Kansas. His parents were tenant farmers who were able to buy their first farm, one that they had worked for a number of years, with financing help from a neighbor. So that definitely informed a lot of Neil's growing up, without running water and things like that, but he was always interested in new technology, and he and his brothers did quite well as they grew up, and that's how he wound up working in Kansas City and co-founding Cerner Corporation. So since 2017, the year that Neil and Jeannie passed away, the foundation has grown to have more than $1 billion in assets under management. And so there's a potential to make annual charitable gifts somewhere in the size of $50 to $75 million a year. And that's a really big responsibility. And the foundation board is comprised of Neil's adult children, who at the time of their passing ranged in age from 20s to 30s. And they took very seriously the responsibility of what to do with the foundation, how to make sure that it had the type of impact that Neil and Jeannie would have wanted it to have. And so in early 2019, the family-led board made a study of issues that Neil and Jeannie cared about. And they wanted to make sure that they understood several broad topics in order to narrow the focus of their future giving and to ensure a long-term impact. So in 2019, we looked at tough problems in healthcare, in education, in entrepreneurship, and also in rural and agricultural communities, because those were areas that Neil and Jeannie had indicated interest in. But they absolutely blessed the foundation's future generations to narrow that focus because they felt that was too broad. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here and say sort of how that turned out. once we did that study in 2019, I joined the foundation from Cerner Corporation. I'd worked for Neil for about 16 years before his passing. So once we did that study, we found, among other things, one of the most important findings that was very convincing to us was that rural communities represent nearly 20% of our nation's population, but they receive only 6 to 7% of its philanthropic investments. So this felt like the type of gap opportunity that Neil and Jeannie would have liked to see us focus on, whereas healthcare and education broadly in the non-rural context, we're getting lots of attention from foundations already. So that developed into sort of a vision for thriving rural communities, and we localized that to Kansas and northwestern Missouri. And so that's led us to invest in rural serving systems in Kansas and northwestern Missouri. And we have a particular focus on education.
Hold on. April, can you unmute yourself? I had to mute everyone and then it paused.
All right, good. Good?
Yeah, you're good.
All right. Yeah, awesome. Okay. So after we concluded our study and found out about the opportunity in rural philanthropy, that led to a focus on mission of thriving rural communities. And we've been investing in rural serving systems in Kansas and northwestern Missouri. And we still have a particular focus on education and healthcare and economic opportunity within that rural context. So some of you who may work for agencies or other things are probably aware, there's no one definition of rural in the United States, and there's many federal definitions of rural. So we had to choose a focus for ourselves. Our particular focus has been on counties in our geographic catchment that have 50,000 residents or fewer. So this encompasses a lot of really small communities, but it also pushes up into some micropolitan communities like the ones in Southwest Kansas and things as well. And so we've been easing into philanthropy by learning. We're not experts, we're still here to learn. And so for the first couple of years that we got active in rural grant making, our focus was responsive grant making, where we would just take applications from people who were interested and make decisions about those. And in the last year, we've kind of expanded that to include programs of our own design going out the other direction. And so in 2023, our grant making programs have focused on rural childcare, rural nonprofit hospitals, local community foundations in rural areas, because we're trying to strengthen them as organizations, that are more localized, high school CTE programs, and then we're continuing responsive grant making for many other organizations that serve rural communities. So those responsive grants in the past have included organizations like, the private-public partnerships. We've done some work with Network Kansas or Department of Commerce. We funded wastewater testing during the pandemic through the Bureau of Water. It's just been kind of fun to get in and understand and know some of the organizations that have that focus and work in many different contexts, but many of them having to do with rural communities. So we're here for the long haul. We don't anticipate changing our vision and mission, and we expect to be here a long time, and we want to keep studying the factors that influence rural decline and rural thriving. And that's kind of the segue to why we funded this work, which is last year we were looking into some things that had to do with just seemed to be tied to the types of communities that seem to be experiencing some forces that are really pressures for them on hospitals and school systems, things where the tax base may be what supports some key systems in those communities. And if population declines, then those systems may struggle some. And so we wanted a more comprehensive look at the populations of the different communities that we serve and what were the long-term projections for those populations, so that we could kind of begin to think a little bit further out about the types of communities that might need more support, and to begin to be able to think, more strategically down the road about those things. And so I actually went out looking for, I think I contacted someone from Congressional Budget Office to find out who provided population, based research for Kansas. And that's how I was able to get Jeremy's name and reached out to them to begin a discussion. So I went down to the CEDBR conference in October of last year in Wichita, and it was delightful, and met with Jeremy afterwards, and that kind of began the dialogue that our two organizations have had. So we're happy to fund the new population series, and to fund it up until the next complete census, so updates every year. We think it'll be useful information for us as we're studying those communities that we serve, but we also recognize that this would be information that would be of benefit to the communities themselves and to other agencies and organizations that use this data as part of their work. So we're very glad to have that be a benefit as well. So that kind of explains our involvement in it. So thanks, and I'm looking forward to learning with everyone else in this webinar.
Okay. Thanks again for that sponsorship. Again, the center does not receive state funding to do these things anymore, so it was great to have that. Some of those people, particularly the millennials in my office, know this image really well. I'm a little older than this one to remember all this because it wasn't a key one to me, but I thought it was a good one to talk about our population forecast. For those who are not familiar, this is the Lion King. I mean, we've almost everyone seen some way or another. I thought it was useful because it's the circle of life, things that keeps changing dynamically within the state over time. And it is going to continue to move forward. It's not mechanical. And particularly this, and it has a hopeful story, even though there's some tragedy in it, which I think that's an underlying theme we should talk about when we do our population forecasts. Back last spring, again, because of the support from the foundation, we did a survey. We had 85 people respond, and we asked them concerns. You can go back to that presentation, or I can send it to you, of the survey. People were very concerned about the state, about the underlying census counts and the migration. They were least concerned, but still concerned about fertility and mortality. Because of that, and the dialogue that we had with you, with this group, so a lot of people were on here, we made quite a bit of changes and made a lot of flexibility so that we can address the issues that you guys had from our previous forecast and just the structure of the data. So with that, the model. We use an age cohort survival methodology. So it's very simple. Just like Simba always gets a year older, we take the existing population and they get older every single year. Only women of a certain age range are likely to have a probability of having birth. And it's very specific to race, obviously gender and age. And there's some other regional factors that come into play within this model that allows that fertility. The Pride Lands of the Rock, right? You have migration coming in and going out. So one of the changes, because of our survey in the past, when we used that population age survival method, is we used historic migration. The problem, there's so many things that has happened in the past that has structurally shifted because of COVID, because of industries, different parts of the state, that using history was not a useful way of talking about the future of migration. So we did a big change from the previous ones. We did a long-term employment forecast that says, okay, what is underlying growth and demand for some of these communities, particularly some smaller and rural communities that actually have been growing because they have an industry that is expanding behind it. So we have this longer-term employment that then creates this demand for migration. So that's a big shift. Spoiler alert, we also have mortality, just like in the movie. This is the spoiler, Mufasa dies, we all eventually die. So the probability of death, even at younger age cohorts, are all built into this. So we have fertility, population, aging, migration, and mortality are the basic structure for it. The value of doing this is we're taking just the existing structure and then allowing this model to simulate every single year all these things changing. And as people move in, there's new changes in fertility and demand all the way through this. There are a few adjustments to this model. The first one are really college towns and military towns. It is shocking that college students never get older. I'm sitting at a college university, they literally never get older. So that's a problem within this model. So what we do is we have to change that and add elements where they don't get older. And guess what? Even if you're in a community that doesn't have a college, you are connected to college towns and military towns because people get up and move. So in this model, the probability of some of your students getting up and leaving and not coming back is in it, and some of them coming back with education is built into this model. There are a few other adjustments that are in small towns, particularly. They're so small they had a unique effect in there or some undercounting that we made some other small adjustments that were case by case when we had to make some adjustments because it would have gone negative if we hadn't done that. All right. What is captured? This is not directionally, but we have labor demand because of the way we switched the model. We have industry drivers that are driving some communities versus other communities, positive or negative. Consumer preferences are indirectly captured with community vitality. And you'll see that in some of the numbers. Some of these communities are they're investing it, they're growing, and you can see them growing into the future. What is not captured? Just like Pumbaa in this is the kind of the wild person of overall in this thing, there's a lot of things that are not captured. There's no way for this forecast to be accurate because of tornadoes, global prices like oil, entrepreneurs in one community. It can be in a small town where all of a sudden they create a new industry. We can't capture all those unknown variables into it. So this is not set in stone for the future. All right, let's get to the forecast. Last time we did the forecast a few years ago, before the big census update, our forecast was slower than the nation, growing at 0.4% a year. And when we got the new update, this new forecast is slowing down in the future, right? And it's now going to 0.32% annualized growth all the way to the next 50 years. There's a few factors within Kansas that are influencing this slowing effect. One is there's more national competition for labor, and that's making it difficult for Kansas to grow. We have this outmigration of retirees following the millennial kids. We have these delayed choices of these millennials saying, I can't afford college or can't afford starting a family. So they're delaying their kids, and fertility, which you're going to see in a minute, is really showing up in the data. And then we have immigration policies that has impacted some communities more than others, particularly like Southwest Kansas and up in Kansas City. When you need talent or low-skilled and high-skilled communities, we had that lower foreign migrant coming into those communities. So here is a annualized growth rate for each of those 5-year periods. And you'll see there's this double wave, right? You see this growing into 2031, and then you see it growing again in 2056. This double wave effect that's going on in here has a lot to do with those baby boomers, right? Of aging up, and then their echo boomers or millennials, their kids coming through the system and having babies and then filtering through. Plus, we've had a lot of recent investments in the state, which is built into that. So Kansas City and the investment down here in Wichita had some more investments. And so some of that recent growth because of migration and even rural communities, by the way, that we've added in there has really filtered in and saying, okay, this is going to attract some of those family working age population. They're going to have kids, and then those kids are filtering through the system as well. All right. Everyone loves to focus on this older age cohort, probably because a lot of them are even on this call here. When you go to the 65 plus, this is our fastest growing segment, but you can see by level, it's not the largest segment. Particularly women and people living and aging and lasting longer in life is why we have this growth, even with the outmigration. We just have people living longer in the state. The youth is the next one. This is one of those things where, as an implication to the state, look at how slow the growth in youth is going. We have had an outmigration of a lot of that working age female population. So over this last several years, which is going to take a big anchor to the potential growth for the state economy. And different regions of the state really get lost because we lost a lot of that prime age and prime fertility years in there. So we have a slower growth. And then you see prime. Prime is super important. This is your working age population. This drives the overall economy. So you see the baby boomers, a big bubble, the echo coming out, and we're having this prime age grow, and it's growing, but not nearly as fast as the nation, and it's slower. And then you have this slowing effect, even a negative effect here for the younger age cohorts. Now, this one is a little different. So you got to look at this for a second. This is age dependency ratio. If we say for 100 people, right, this is 1.3, For 100 people who are in that 20 to 64-year-olds, that prime age, right? There are 30 people out there that are not in that prime age, that are kids or they're seniors. Why is this important? It's already high. So that means for every 100 people that are in that prime age, you have 30 people out there that are not in that working age segment. This impacts every single community. It impacts policies that we're doing it. Most of this is not in youth anymore, right? Youth costs a lot because of public education, but now they're going to the senior side, and now we have these additional costs. They're in fixed income, and they're now wanting different services and effects throughout the state. And we can see it's driving up all the way up closer to 1.4, right? This is a huge shift in how and the tax structure of our economy is going to be impacted in the future. All right, what are some implications? Labor shortages are still there. This is going to slow our economy because of the prime age. Costs of labor going up, health impact on health services because of the aging population. Decreased school enrollment. This one happens quite a bit where we have some of these rural communities already worrying about losing it, particularly because they had this declining and out-migration, but when you don't have women of a certain age having babies, that's going to self-enforce some of this trap. And those schools are going to be even more impacted in the future. Minority population. This is fascinating here. Every part of this entire state has significant growth, almost double growth in Northwest Kansas. All of them are growing in minority. Now, we have a very simplistic minority because there's not enough data to get much more detail because we wanted their age structures in here. So we have white, black, other, and other includes a whole lot in here. It includes people that say more than one race. One of my pet peeves is that people think, oh my goodness, what's happening to the black population is not increasing as much, is actually increasing. There is a big shift. In previous census, people said, oh, I'm black. And now, because we allow more than one race, they're saying, I'm no longer black. I am more than one race. And so they shifted out. So they shifted out. It makes black look like it's not growing as much, when the reality it wasn't that. It's just shift in how people responded to the survey. Hispanic is actually an ethnicity and it's calculated separately. We wanted to do Hispanic because that is a big driver for this state and different parts of the state. So we have Hispanic calculated separately. You'll notice white is almost zero growth. Matter of fact, when Jonathan, and I should give kudos to Jonathan on here, Jonathan's from the Center for Economic Development. He's been working on this for almost 6 months solidly, trying to produce these numbers, by the way. We had some elements where white population was actually in negative. It was declining in future years. Outmigration and mortality and not enough fertility, particularly in that group. It adjusted out to be almost flat, no growth in the white population. So the minority is growing as a share, particularly because white population is not growing in the state. All right, what are those implications? Some of you may have attended our event that we did in that study that we did a few years ago. We actually did an econometric model of neighborhoods across the state, and we found that once you start increasing some minorities in Kansas, so we statistically showed this relationship, it has a negative effect, and then it has this positive effect on employment and wages. So the more diverse that's happening, and it's clear because a lot of these parts of the state, think about Southwest Kansas, they need more people, so you get more people filling jobs that are not wanting to be filled locally. They're filling those jobs, they're creating wages, and they're then generating value to the state economy. There's some significant changes for this entire state. Think about all those neighborhood or city parades across the state. That's great because it creates culture, but some of those have been declining because you have a shift in the people living in your community. How are those community parades going to shift and embrace a very much more diverse community now coming back into the years and growing, right? And it's not just Black and Hispanic. If you go down to Southwest Kansas, and Joanna Knight's on here, we have all kinds of other racial groups from all over the globe that are filling in jobs throughout the state. So there's some big changes. It will affect even social justice and the crime and everything throughout the state. Metro, urban, rural, this one everyone loves to talk about. I want to look at the bottom right corner. You can see the metro. In this one, compared to previous one, is actually not as strong as the previous one. That population growth is hitting those walls of being able to attract. There's still a growth magnet. There's still sucking in talent. However, they're not growing as fast as they could because of all the competition of labor. You look at here in these micropolitan towns, think about the Dodge and Garden Cities and so forth. This looks like it is zero growth. The reality is, and this is very telling, there are some communities that are investing and they're growing and they have a strong industry underneath them. And there are some industries that are micropolitan towns that have been declining and declining by quite a bit annualized in the future because they got in traps. They have costs. They have other issues that are weighing them down. So this micropolitan town, you'll hear me talk, I've always been very optimistic, but the reality is some are strong, some are weak, and some are making investments. And then you have rest of Kansas declining. Before you just think this is rural, I want to show you we have a whole nother way of looking at rural than just saying, hey, it's declining. One of the facts that you should take away from this, the rest of Kansas is not declining as fast as it was before because we switched. We can see over in actual data from ACS data, people are moving back to places like Clay and all these other places in Western Kansas, and they have had this structural shift in demand of labor. Right over the last couple decades, we used less and less labor because of farm, and now we've gotten down to that minimum amount of people to actually be at that corporate farm. And so you can see that decline really slow down and reverse in some communities. And so that really already played out in this data. So it looks negative, but hold on, there's a lot more to it than that. Here is every single county. Growing counties on the left, the bigger urban areas not growing as fast as they were before. We have some of these other smaller communities that have switched from declining to growing, right? And then on the right side, we have some declines. Just like the movie, if some of you know this movie, right? Simba is our hero down here, the big lion. Simba left because of his uncle took over the Pride Rock. He left, he ran into these friends, and he had no worries, be happy, Akuma Matata, right? And he was just out there not being a leader. And then all of a sudden, we have Rafiki comes in and says, hey, you still have to be a leader, right? You still can do something with this, even though our land does not look good. It looks barren. It looks problematic, right? And in this, he hits him over the head. And Simba says, why did you do that? He said, don't worry. That's in the past. I hit you on the head. It's past. Now let's focus on the future. And that's the same thing with every single community. I look at this around the state and I hear people just only focus on population and not any other variables. You can have population declining and you can have wealth growing. You can have population declining and you can have innovation and all these other factors going on, and you can have a vibrant community. And you can also switch this because I showed you in the previous slide, there are some communities that were rural that have been growing. So don't get caught up just because we're aging the whole forward, aging this population forward, doesn't mean that is set in stone of Pawnee being the fastest declining county over the next 50 years and declining by half. All right, implications, rural and urban. We did an event called Rural Urban Divide, tongue in cheek, because I go around the state, everyone says, I'm a rural community. I have no connections to Kansas City. And I just hate that idea. So we did this one Kansas, and you should go back and look at this. We found that we are highly interconnected statistically, tax flows, labor talent share, and how they go back and forth and build skills and knowledge and so forth. Innovation, and I don't have time to go through this. It's very important for having a healthy Northwest Kansas to support down here in Pittsburgh, since we have Paul on here, right? It's important for Pittsburgh to be strong and healthy, and that east part of the state for Topeka to be healthy, right? We are all interconnected, and we really need to think about being a more dynamic economy as one economic unit. All right, again, here's the stuff that's not captured: tornadoes, oil prices, commodities, things like that. Alternative forecasting. Remember we did that survey? In the past, we created a survey and it was static. It kind of ran through all the numbers and we had a flat file. This time we have a very dynamic model. And we asked people back in the spring, hey, if you didn't like the census data, you could give us reasons why we need to update, particularly Garden City. You could give us numbers now, and we have it so that we can re-estimate all these forecasts and create you an alternative forecast if you know they undercounted minorities, particularly like in Southwest Kansas. Or let's say you need a city. We can now do cities all built in here to use the whole framework of people moving in and out. So we can do a city, we can do other sub-city levels. We can allow a new migration. So Let's go to the battery plant or another big event. Let's say you're in Northwest Kansas and you get a new dairy farm and you have some new employees. We can show not only those new employees coming in and how that will impact your schools. Let's say you want to do a policy question on teenage pregnancy programs across the state. We can change fertility or mortality because you change something in public health. If you're interested, Jonathan's on here and we'd love to talk to you about how we can do this. And you can have a lot of this data on your own website and be interactive and say, okay, here's if we do nothing, and here's this alternative forecast because we need to make adjustments so you can tell developers and so forth and plan for your schools. All right. Go to our website. The new website is population.cdbr.org. Here are a whole bunch of filters. Hopefully in the next few months, we're going to take the same data and put additional filters on here. Above poverty, below poverty across the state. What are those counties that have high housing costs or low housing costs? Because of housing is an issue. What about healthcare and hospitals around the state? Are they growing or not declining because the hospital's there or a school present? So we want to put additional variables and have more. But right now, you've got a lot of variables. There's a couple things you should know. Right now, almost all these filters are set on all, so it works functionally, except for under the state, because we added Missouri. So that's the only one that has just Kansas in there. But you can go and see Missouri if you want to see Missouri, and everything below will add together. So all the data is dynamic and you can explore. So let's say I want to know in metro areas that are a certain age cohort, that are females and minority, you can just play around and everything will calculate for you. So if you want to change something, make sure that you go back and switch it back to all if you're playing around. So all the map changes, all the data below changes. Because of all that dynamic factors, at the very bottom, you'll see it shows you what you've captured in that. So say, hey, did I really capture this or did I make a mistake and eliminate some parts of the state that I really wanted to capture in this agglomeration? Some of you have regional economies. It doesn't fit the Kansas Department of Labor definition. You can aggregate any segment of counties that you want, and you can create that. And actually, you can put it on your website, what I'll show you in a second. Some people want to download the data, right? So if you go in the very bottom corner, there's this download arrow. My favorite is crosstabs, but you can click data. This data one is everything, and it's really hard to process unless you are a good data miner. But crosstabs is my favorite one. And then you can scroll over here. You can download any of those graphs, or down here you can download that specific table of all the filters you did above. It will download that combination of data that you need. Here's another one. Let's say you have 20 counties that are unique to you, or one county that you want to either share with a group of people or post on your website. You can go down here and do this embed right here. I just picked Allen County, and now you can put Allen County, this whole thing, and you can post it on your own website, or you can share a link to a group of people, or you can do 20 counties. So you can have it and set it, and you don't have to reselect those 20 or 22 counties that you always look at. You can set it at whatever you want, save that link, and then you can use that in the future. Okay, that I wanted to go through it fairly quickly, and I did. There's a lot more to discuss about the implications on these communities and these age structures and so forth. But this is a good time for me to pause and ask you guys if you have any questions. If you're media, let me know if you're media and what part of the state you're in. And if you're curious about a certain component, I've got this all up and we can talk in more detail. Actually, but while I do this, Andrea, can you unmute and maybe I see there's some questions and comments in the chat box. Do you want to filter those in while people are coming up with their questions and ask those?
Absolutely. So we had a couple of comments just at the beginning. Interest around the surrounding counties that should still benefit economically, even if they are projected to fall, if they're next to a county that's projected to rise. We do have one question. Was there a particular outlier in the result that surprised you most?
All right, so the first comment, those regional economies are dynamic and interlinked. So it's inherently already built into it unless there's a new event that would change that regional economy. So around the Wichita area, for example, There are a few counties that are declining, even the metro area is expanding, right? And it's just because they have not been as competitive and they're losing labor and things like that. It's possible, again, we can do scenarios and say, hey, now this one county was declining could be growing because it's near an urban area. And your second comment was what again, Andrea?
Was there a particular outlier
Oh.
in the results that surprised you most?
Jonathan and I, there was a lot of variations that were quite a bit of surprising factors to this by age and by migration. And I try to capture a few of them in this presentation, but I will tell you, there's so much content from this that Jonathan has already written 3 articles. We'll be talking about this throughout this entire year. So there were a lot of surprises. There were communities that were rural, that were declining, that are now much more robust. And I say robust, they went from declining to barely declining or increasing all of a sudden. Or we had urban areas that were growing that have just lost some of their edge, right? And you can start piecing together why that is. So there were a lot of surprises in there. I say the biggest surprise it was actually the shift in the minority. We already knew that we're growing in minorities, but it's really the white population going to almost no growth at all. The loss of that prime fertile age cohorts and delay in choices going to almost, that was probably the biggest surprising overall factor. I knew it was slowing, but I did not know it was slowing that much. And that might surprise a lot of people. We already knew minority was growing. How many people knew it was because we were moving out and we lot of retirees moving out, and the prime age had declined so much that now we don't have enough females to have babies in that race category. That one's probably the most startling one that I didn't expect. But while we're at this, and before you ask the next question, this is another big shift. In the past, we didn't look at race. We just looked at overall population, and then we did a special one on race. This one, everything's built up from race to add to total population. So we allow all these dynamics of migration and moving and changes in that than we've had in the past. So it was pretty exciting and how, well, I don't want to geek out on you, but we'll share this in our group. I don't know if you know this, we're a census population provider, and we'll be able to talk to our other states about some of the unique innovations we did in here. So next question, Andrea.
Okay, I'm going to make 2 comments real quick. The slides and a recording of this will be on the website later, and the articles are forthcoming. We've only published one so far. It went out this morning, but the rest of them will be coming out over the next month. The next question I have, though, is someone's curious if you looked at the percentage of active duty veterans of working age remaining in the state and the economic impact of keeping that labor pool in our state.
So this is great about this new model I could never do in the past. So we do have military built into it. Jonathan worked quite hard on this. So we go back to each military town and we have them adjusted so that active duty's there. And if we wanted a policy scenario as BREG, base realignment and closure, or BREC, not BREG. BREG is the Wichita, BRAC. Sorry, I had to remember all these terminologies. BRAC, base realignment and closure. So we could sit there and say, hey, what does an expansion of a base or decline in a base impact that community in the long term? And that it's been a while since I've been engaged in my BRAC realignment conversations. So they always come up. I think they're like a 5-year intervals where they go and re-look at those bases. But that's going to be important for up in Leavenworth, up in Riley, down here in Wichita. And there's some other places that we can go and do that simulation, particularly their unique factor, how they stay a certain age and delay births and so forth. So we have the ability to do that as a policy analysis we've never been able to do in the past. Next question.
Almost forgot to unmute. Can you provide some detail on how you see the skilled workforce changing, population skills, training, etc.?
So that would be a good research question in the future, because we could take Jonathan's on here and he's done a lot with the skills, knowledge, and abilities. We've taken skills, knowledge, and ability and applied it to industries and went back and forth. We have not done skills, knowledge, and abilities back to the population and how they shifted. That's actually interesting. Like, what is the demand for some of those higher skilled and lower skilled, filling that population demand. And as both, I have talked about this in quite a bit of detail of how this state needs low skilled and high skilled workers, and that how they're moving around. So that's actually a good, if someone has interest and someone wants to help us with that, we would love to, that would be a good one too, that we have the basis and previous experience of transferring skills, because you can easily transfer it already from ACS. We already know healthcare, manufacturing, and by community. So that might be a fun research question to see how migration plays on that.
Ready for the next one?
Yes.
Could healthcare reform, support for rural hospitals, et cetera, be a significant factor in population migration growth?
So I mean, that's kind of answering itself the way the question's set up, right? We already know, and I really don't have to go that far, that hospitals are important for a community. Same thing with schools for their growth and vitality of a community. But one of the things is I went around the state, and I guess I should. Back in October, I went around the state, and in the February, I went around the state. So we did 20 some communities. So you don't know which community it is. But I did go to a community and we talked to a hospital, and they were on a panel and said, hey, we've got a problem. We cannot pay our bills in the community, and talked about the problems they have. So we got two issues. You can either let these hospitals continue and doing this self-preservation, just trying to survive, but slowly decline and not provide the needed services and help when the community next to them was also doing it, or we have to think about how do they merge and actually provide adequate health and create quality of life for the workers at a cost-effective rate when they're all struggling to, not I say all, the majority of hospitals are struggling, even in urban markets are struggling in the state. So I won't go much further than that because that's a deeper question to research in the future. I just happen to want to put those hospitals associated with this so that we can do some more policy analysis in the future. Next question.
All right, Celia Hack with KMUW was wondering when was the last time we did an analysis like this, and if we had any comparisons for age and race categories when it comes to their growth numbers in the previous analysis compared to their growth numbers in the current analysis. Right.
So I did that very simple one at the beginning and showed our previous forecast was 0.4% for the state, and now it's 0.32%. We did look in detail about every single county. When we were doing our scenario analysis of every county, some grew, some declined, and we went through all those details by age, by race, by county, and changes in fertility. The big themes there, first, metro areas are not growing as fast as they were before. Rural areas are not declining as much as they were before. Fertility has changed quite a bit because we had this several years of outmigration of that key cohort of women that's impacting our long-term fertility rates in the future. That's my big summary build. I can say quickly on this, but so you can definitely call me and we can do more one-on-one, and if you have a specific question, we can show you some more data. The last time we did it, I think. So we've done several iterations, but I think it's been 5 years since we did the full population forecasts. And it was longer than that when we did the race forecast. But Jonathan might be able to state otherwise. Has it been around 5 years since
you had it right? Yeah. Well, the last one was 2018.
Yeah. So the last time was 2018 before the big census update, which obviously made a big change because we had census every decade, and then we tried to take ACS. They try to do these survey estimates to readjust in between. And so there's a big shift that happened. So that's probably honestly, that's the biggest shift in our forecast is, the time between the 2010 and 2020 census and things getting kind of out of line. But that's the biggest shift between the two. Next question.
We have more of a statement that Junction City is working with Fort Riley on a major initiative to keep existing soldiers in the region. As many as 2,100 to 3,100 soldiers exit Fort Riley each year. Many will stay in the region if they have services to match them in civilian jobs.
Before you go too far, that's a valuable one. And so someone asked earlier about active duty, but you have retired veterans that will come to locations, particularly Topeka, where you have veteran hospitals and public services, or they like to retire near because there is a cohort of people with similar experiences and public services to support veterans, right? There are mental health, there's other social services that are valuable to veterans. And I talk a lot about retirement dynamics and how some of our rural communities could be a retirement destination. Some of them could actually be a veteran destination where you specialize and say, hey, like Leavenworth, it is a destination for retirement because they can have the infrastructure, the roads, the services, and the social network for them to actually grow in the future. And by the way, once you do that, you get automatic funding through your veteran hospital and public service when there are more veterans there. So you actually get federal money. It's like an industry, federal money to support additional public services in a community. It can be a stimulus effect to do that. Next question, Andrea?
I don't really have any other questions. Someone else was commenting on the military thing about legislators needing to incentivize veterans. I think you covered a lot of that in what you just said. So I don't have any other new questions unless someone wants to chime in.
And you don't have to just do it in chat. You can also unmute yourself if you have a question or comment. And they could be comments too. An observation that you made, I'm all for it. Or you want me to go back to one of the slides of my implications and talk more about it? Because there's a whole lot more that we could talk about, one of those elements within this forecast.
Jeremy, this is Troy Carlson up in Johnson County here. And I'm the one that posed made the statement about Junction City. I've been working with them going on 3 years now, putting together this program of what's called the Junction for Military Civilian Innovation. We're using AI to help these soldiers transition into the civilian market because the problem soldiers have is they're prescribed what they're going to be doing. They don't know what is in store for them in the civilian market, even with transition assistance programs. So they need to be ramped up. Their services need to be ramped up to help them effectively transition. A couple things that I think are very important is that in Junction City, on the low side, about 7.8% of the soldiers stay in the region. But we found that working with them at Fort Riley, 35% would stay if they had gainful employment within the area. And I think that's a very compelling business case. In addition, and people dispute this number, but we work with Master Sergeant Spade, who heads up the Transition Assistance Program at Fort Riley. 90% of the soldiers would stay if their spouses had gainful employment when they exit the military. And I think that's a huge strategy to keep a lot of these soldiers in the area. But it's a big deal. And of course, you have McConnell down there in Wichita, which has really been a boost for your cybersecurity industry in Wichita. And kudos to you guys for that.
So we talked about just the active. I talked about retirement. Now you're talking about that transition from active to civilian. And you subtly said this, but one of these elements in here is the skills of military. Now, this is not a new thing. People already know there's wonderful skills of when they go through the military process. The social skills they learn, how to deal with conflict, are some of the things that society needs in great spades, and could be a huge value for that transition. If you get someone who's skilled that can come in and be in management, or down in Wichita, we have all that technical skills that are coming out for that cybersecurity, as you just mentioned. They come into that market, innovation and wealth. Veterans tend to have a lot of innovation. They like to start new businesses. They can take risks. They can handle those things. So it could be a very stimulus effect to really figure out that transition of that active military to not retirement, but to civilian employment and engagement in that entrepreneurial scene or to management within a community. So there's a lot of values.
Well stated. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Hey, Jeremy, this is Jonathan McRoy from Wichita. Thank you so much for the presentation. I wanted to just emphasize that I think that the legislature can use this data when we're looking at how to retain veteran talent from 3 large military bases in our state. They're qualified and they're diverse. and we lose them to states with stronger, better veterans benefits like Texas, Florida, Oklahoma just enhanced theirs. And so, maybe this data can help us determine how we keep such a significant talent pool in our state.
Absolutely. I think it'd be fun to run a scenario saying, hey, here's this age cohort, here's their family or spouses, and if we did this kind of service, what would that do to our community on growth on the population? And then we can flip that population over into other models on other employment and wealth and income. I think there would be a lot of opportunity to have that dialogue and see, what kind of program and how much would that benefit publicly and privately to firms around the state. We're sure getting in a lot on the military side. There could be other questions. Usually people want to talk about the retirement dynamics. I haven't heard that many questions there. Or youth. That one's very low on the youth one, and that's going to have a big implications on our schools and public services. Think about a lot of people know we have all this demand on this older retirement generation, but think about all of the Meals on Wheels and needs for roads and needs for handicapped access. There's a lot of shifts there that need to happen.
Well, Jeremy, this is Michael Womack at the SBA. Could you go back and explain that interdependency slide between, I guess, the working age versus the youth and so forth, and what would be the ideal ratio, or what would be a healthy ratio as far as working age versus youth and retirees? It was at the beginning. There you go.
Yeah. So that age dependency ratio. So it's just, I'm not sure there's a perfect number. Just like anything in the economy, there's not a perfect number. But noticing that we're shifting for less people being actively working in the population is a problem from a tax base. That's during the prime age. That's when you buy houses. That's when you buy a bigger house and have property taxes and have demand for it that drives the property value. That's when you spend the most on retail. So structures of local and state economies, you need that prime age because that's when you have all that consumption. But because the prime age is going up and we actually have a decreasing youth population, you also tend to spend a lot on kids. They're going to spend less on kids. They're shifting their spending. And then you go to this higher of that retirement age and they're on fixed income. They don't have the ability for increase in property taxes or changes in tax structure in the future, right? It's gonna shift the dynamic of ability to pay. Your other question was the interdependence of community. Is that right? This conversation, right?
Yes, sir.
So when we looked, we had this rural and urban divide. You can Google on our website. We have a whole bunch of slides. We saw people moving from rural areas to urban. Everyone says, "Oh, this rural community." All of our people left and went to Kansas City or to Wichita. The reality is they moved to Wichita and then they moved back. There's a lot more moving back. And if you look at over time, there were communities that were very rural that had their own retail, their own health, and they could be self-supplied. And over time, that very, very rural community now is dependent on the micropolitan, the Dodge, the Pittsburgh, and so forth for their healthcare. They used to be self-sustaining. Now they are interconnected. And now that Pittsburgh and Dodge and Emporia, they used to be more self-sustaining, and now they're more dependent on the big urban markets because the shift in demand of healthcare. We'll just use healthcare as an example. Think about your doctors, right? The specialty doctors that are only in Kansas City and Topeka and Wichita, right? That makes them more dependent and interconnected between them. With all the stuff on our health exchange on healthcare, you could be in a very rural area. They already have all your information to go to the hospital in Dodge and then get into Kansas City or Wichita for very extreme cases because of that shift in that market. Retail as well. We used to have much more self-sustaining retail, and now that shifts more there. When you look at, and I don't remember the exact, for a 1% growth in rural farm income, it had somewhere like you have to look at my website, it's like a 0.4% in tax revenue in all the major metropolitan towns. They're buying it locally. So we're highly interconnected. And I go more and more about labor flows, innovation. You have innovation in rural areas that then urban areas benefit. You have urban areas that are getting more costly, and this is a great example. You have an industry, aerospace, and then they say, "Hey, I can get land cheaper and labor cheaper in this rural community." And so they go out to what I call hinterland and go to a more rural market to use that labor and that cheaper land. And that shift is going to continue to happen where they're interconnected. This aerospace cannot be by Wichita alone. It's across the entire state, right? There's in Kansas City, all across the state to make it successful. And I can go more because we had a whole like 3-hour event just on that one, but that gives you a little bit of the element. We did do some econometric modeling on that rural urban interconnection and showed that they were statistically were interconnected and dependent on each other.
I think that Celia Hack might have had her hand raised earlier. Did you have a question, Celia?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
I was just wondering, so you talked about the youth decline kind of in growth and about how in part that's because there's less women of the age that could have a child. I'm wondering if like cost of living and cost of raising a child, like housing and childcare, are also impacting that number, and whether you're able to like, find the impact of that.
Oh, so yeah, so it's actually embedded already because we're seeing in the fertility rates generally is not just the female's choice. As men and female are deciding to wait to have kids because they're not financially stable, right? But they're also delaying it because they want more education and they want to move in their career for further. Plus, they want to delay it because of economic effects, like that house. That's part of one of those elements. If you can't get the house, you don't have the security, and you don't have that. So those are all interconnected to them, and how much of its correlation and causation, we can't really tease out all that in this dialogue, in what we've done here. There is also another element. As we get more educated, we also have less fertility as well. When you look at fertility, it is much higher in minority, particularly Hispanic, than it is in when you look by race. So the fertility is actually, the story I told in the last time I did this presentation is we're great at making babies in Kansas, and everyone would laugh. And then I would say we're not. And it's not the people in the room because they tend to be older and they tend to be a lot of white people. It is the minority communities, and you can see where they have a lot of fertility. And you can talk to those hospitals. You go to Southwest Kansas, there's a lot of babies being made down in Southwest Kansas. They age up and then they migrate throughout the state, providing that labor pool. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Do you have follow up on that or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. One element that we are going to put in, we did never have before, and will be in the next couple of months, is we wanted to put up a diagnostic tool kind of thing where we have every single county and we have your migration, your fertility, and your mortality, just those components of how it changes. So right now, what you see the flattened version. Here's what it looks like. But the reality is you could be having tons of baby like Southwest Kansas, and you can have a lot of outmigration because they're also get this upward mobility, right? And you can see more of that overall churn. So that's one of the elements we want to add that I've never seen any other state do before, but we now have that built into the model so we can have a deeper dive of saying, hey, so someone looking at a hospital, looking at the fertility or looking at the fertility, you just look at how many kids. That doesn't tell you have that many kids, but they could be migrating out, right? It doesn't tell you the full story. Same thing in mortality. Just so you have number of people that are over 65 doesn't tell you all the details of what age group, when they're dying, and all that. So we're going to have a really neat, I think, a pretty unique and robust. That's one of our next goals to add. All right, I could go on for hours, but I don't want to bore people. Are there any last conversations? And we can let those people who are tied up with other busy stuff, they can feel not socially obligated to stay on when we're over 11. And those people want to chat, yeah, I could keep talking forever. So any last minute big conversations? Questions? All right, I want to say thank you again for April to be on here and for the foundation for supporting this. I'm excited about this. I thought we had some great dialogue, so thank you for supporting and and the continued support in the future. I think it's exciting that we can update this more and continue to make other tweaks and make it a valuable tool for everyone. So thank you very much. I'm gonna still stay on so I can, if you have a question or you want to see how to pull a certain data element out for your community or for your purpose, hospitals or whatever it might be. I know we had a library and hospital and other developers that are probably on this call, so can definitely answer those questions. All right, thank you. Bye.
Hey, Jeremy, it's Mike King.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Hey, how, from a manufacturing point of view, as we go around the state and help try to match skill sets with opportunity costs, how is there a way to use population to help guide out-of-state manufacturer to the correct location in the state?
So one, we have other tools to look at skills and abilities, so that would be good for the attraction side. On the population side, it is really good for the community to say, okay, hey, just like the Panasonic, right? I can come back and say, hey, this is how many people coming in. Now the community needs to get schools and hospitals and roads. Definitely on the, because I'm working on a transportation group using this right now. So it helps build all those out, and building all those out really help answer the question on the manufacturing side. So when you get a big project like that and you want to attract someone, right? You can say, hey, here we've thought through this, and here is what will happen in our community. So a lot of times when you look at a manufacturing, right, they want to know that, have you thought through it? What is this the impact? And be able to simulate this now would be a valuable tool for them. Now, I love the idea that came up in here, and I hadn't thought about it, is taking our skills, knowledge, and abilities, which we already have, and match it to where people live versus where people work. I think that would be fantastic. So we've already done the skills and abilities. You were on that. Were you on that meeting when we did in the Industry Research Exchange back in April?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so we did a whole detail of where's the demand of skills and ability, taking that same skills, knowledge, and transferring it over to the population side of where they live. That would be really cool. I think that would be a great tool if we matched it across the entire state and then had our own way of pulling this up. Someone could say, hey, yeah, here's the overall skills. We have that production worker who can do this at a higher level or lower level. So if you have because we have machine shops all around the state, right? Particularly for Hutton, right? You have a community over here in near Parsons or something like that, and they want to add, and you could match that down and say how many of them have a production worker. So that'd be neat. Plus, I will say I have a new data set that uses data from job openings, so we can transfer some of that over as well. So I've got another one that would be helpful to answer those questions. That's really neat. That's already done.
Also, another outlier that you might consider at some point, and is the McPherson College gift that they were recently given, the $1 billion endowment. It's it isn't going to be today or tomorrow when they get that, but they should be getting $250 million here pretty quick. But that's going to completely change the outlook on education and manufacturing in central Kansas as well.
Yeah. So there's actually more to be done there for McPherson, because you have the innovation spillover from really investing in that institution, right? And how it is an anchor for that community. So you can graduate more people. That's valuable for the labor supply. But the knowledge and transfer and how as an economic engine to that region, particularly oil and gas, there could be a huge value. And the spillover effects of them buying. I've talked to a few people in McPherson. We were going to have an event. They had an event last week of trying to reimagine their community and try to I imagine leverage some of that funding that they've had as well, because that was part of their event.
All right, thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, thanks.
Jeremy, you do have another question in the chat here. Jacob asked one that I even had thought about asking. So how much of the population growth or decline is related to housing availability? And he says, it seems like every place that I have lived, there's an issue with housing supply.
Yep. well, the state did a housing study 2 years ago, 3 years ago now. And yeah, it says that we have a housing supply issue. This is not really that different from what's going on in the nation. The real problem is that we don't even have the capacity of framers, some of that skilled part of the manufacturing, to ever build our way out of a lot of this. So the question then is very specific. How does this affect housing? That's why I wanted to do, and if you have another idea on housing, I thought it would be useful to say that affordability index on housing and put above and below for county and then show the population. So I think that would be a good filter tool of saying what communities, and it might surprise us, by the way, because I'll give you an example. Housing affordability in Douglas or Lawrence is not very affordable, but they're growing, right? I think there could be some really good, interesting factors. Housing affordability in Southwest Kansas, I've seen their housing data before. It can be pretty expensive down there, but then you have some areas that are declining, right? So there could be crowding out effects by some regions, whereas other regions are not affecting it, like Lawrence and Manhattan, who just continue to grow even though home prices are going up. So that's one that we kind of already pitched out and we just haven't done. But if you have another idea of a filter or a study that we could do on there, we could definitely add that. All right, we're down to 22 people. There must be, or 21. So I think we hit a wall. Is there any other last questions? All right, thanks again for especially these dedicated 22 people who are I like the term nerd, super nerds with me. How about that?
It's just interesting to see what kind of questions people have, and I appreciate the opportunity to join in today. So thank you very much, Jeremy, and
yeah, thank you.
Center, yep, and to the rest of participants too.
All right, have a great day. What do you need from me, Andrea? You got it recording? I didn't.
Yeah, as soon as we ended, it should send it to me. So I don't think I need anything right now.
All right. All right, I'll talk to you guys later.
Bye.
Yep. Bye, guys.